Social media is tied to virtually everything that we do. Is the ever-growing presence of social media hurting or helping human relationships? Matt, you have 1 minute.
I believe it's hurting human relationships. I think when you look at last night, for example, many of you were probably following along the debate on Twitter while watching it. And let's say Hillary Clinton posts one thing about one thing. It doesn't matter what it is. The vitriol that is spitted back at her or at others is truly remarkable. And it's not just in something as polarizing as a presidential debate in what's really been a interesting look at human interaction. When the Durham Bulls, earlier this week, my employer, we posted something about Thursday night football and a similarity between the Denver Broncos uniform and one of the uniforms we wear. I was called to be fired for a satire tweet by Denver Broncos fans. Someone actually called for someone to lose their job because of a tweet from a minor league baseball team regarding color combinations between an NFL team and a minor league baseball team. So I don't take kindly to that. I think it's hurting human relationships.
Dr. Mitch?
Hi, thanks for having me here. I just want to say I think this debate is rigged. I notice a social media bias. I do not accept the results of this debate. I'm happy to talk about social media. I study adolescent peer relationships, and my graduate student, Jackie Nisi, has introduced me to thinking about how social media might be playing a role in adolescents' lives. And I would be happy to play along. I feel mixed about social media in general. But when it comes to how it's helping or hurting human relationships, there's really interesting research that suggests that when we reach adolescence, our brains turn on a desire for social rewards. In other words, a way in which we care about how many people like us, air quotes, like us, how much people are paying attention to us, looking at us, and approving of us. That creates a kind of status or popularity that really is not the same thing as having normal friendships. And social media is promoting it.
All right, so I've just been told by the powers to be to give you longer than 1 minute in the opening remark. That seems to be going quite quickly. So in the opening remark, I'll throw it back to Matt. Anything else that you would like to add in your opening statement?
I like my job. Social media is fun, but I think it hurts human relationships.
Dr. Mitch, anything to add to that?
Sure, I'd say what we find is that there's even research when you put adults in an fMRI machine and look at their brains, there's results that say that just having someone have their tweets liked or retweeted actually turns on that area of the brain in a way that people say have kind of made us almost physically addicted to social media. People are posting simply to see how many followers and likes they can get. That's probably fine among us adults that can balance that among other demands in our lives. But for adolescents, it's important because if you talk to a teen today about their life goals, their most noble aspirations, it's about the number of followers they have on Instagram. It's about how many comments they get within the first 15 minutes of posting a photo. And for that reason, I would say there is a way that social media might be changing human relationships, particularly among those that are young, in a way that's a little scary to think about if you project out what those adolescents will care about 10 years from now.
All right, we can move on to question number 2. And Dr. Mitch, we will start with you for this one. Much of our communication is now done in the form of a text, post, or image. Has the use of social media developed us into better communicators?
In 1980, if a kid came home from school and they had a fight with their friend or in disagreement with a potential partner, they might call up somebody to talk about it. And when they call, they might get a busy signal. I don't know how many of you know what a busy signal even is anymore. But when they got that busy signal, they needed to hang up the phone and figure out how to deal with those feelings by themselves. Or they had to develop a closer relationship with someone else in their home, another friend, a sibling, God forbid one of their parents, and actually talk about their feelings in that moment. That skill is not needed anymore. Adolescents can get instantaneous feedback on anything and everything they're feeling and experiencing with the click of a button. It's interesting to think about what communication skills are different now compared to just 30 years ago. My graduate student Jackie Nisi did a study where she looked at adolescents right at the transition where they learn romantic relationship skills. And she looked at those who had lots of social media interactions with romantic partners and those that had face-to-face interactions. What happened? A year later, those with the big social media interactions, they weren't so good at romantic relationships, especially the boys. Girls learn how to do that stuff from early on, but boys, they rely on their interactions with females to learn how to engage in intimate interactions. And those boys who had engaged in mostly social media interactions, they were far worse at romantic relationship skills than others. So I would say that this is hurting communication, particularly for our youth.
Matt, and just so you guys know, I think we're going to allot 2 minutes now for the opening remarks. So you're good. You're good. You had like 5 seconds left. Totally fine. Matt?
I would prefer just the one. But when when you look at how people communicate nowadays, again, it's no question, it's text-based, it's Twitter-based, it's Instagram comments. And I think that depending how you look at it, we've become better communicators, but there's also grammar that's lacking. So I'm sure many of you are in hiring positions. You get cover letters, you get resumes, you get introductory emails from folks, and someone that doesn't use an apostrophe in the word that's simply derived from text messaging from someone who's grown up with that their entire life. But at the same time, we are able to share ideas like never before with the advent of Twitter and Facebook. And you get to see different ways of thinking every single time you log on to one of your social platforms. So I think folks are funnier now because they follow 7 comedians that they never would have seen before unless for a stand-up act. And their thinking changes with every single tweet, Facebook post, Instagram, Snapchat, whatever it is, every single post that they see changes their way of thinking. And whether they know it or not, they're becoming more intelligent. Now, that's not to say that there's not a lot of dumb posts out there, because there are. There's a lot of people that get to show that they are not intelligent humans because they have social media. But when you get to see an actual discussion taking place, whether it's on a Facebook page that acts as a community forum, whether it's on a Twitter thread between a respected commentator and a lawyer about whatever the topic may or may not be, you're going through and you're ingesting information, and that in turn makes you a better communicator. You see how intelligent folks interact with each other, and then you in turn absorb that and can communicate in a one-on-one setting better. So the person who writes that cover letter may have 3 or 4 grammatical errors in the typed up form, but if you grant them an interview, you might see that that person is really coherent. They're just a factor of what they've grown up doing. Because again, they've texted that's their entire life and no one's ever been there to call them on it. But when you actually see their way of thinking in person, you might be impressed based on what you saw on paper.
Dr. Mitch, any follow-up to that?
Wrong.
You're a puppet.
You're a nasty man. You're a nasty man.
Gentlemen, I'd like to remind you that this is...
So adolescents tell us that they feel incredibly pressured to communicate on social media. If someone posts a picture of themselves, a selfie, or a picture of them with some friends, they feel incredibly pressured to respond to their friends' posts immediately. 15 minutes is too long. It's a sanction to your friendship if you don't respond quickly enough. And that's not just adolescents. I have a friend in her 50s who's called me up on the phone and said, "Can you please like my Facebook post? Because it's been up there for a while, no one's liked it, and I'm very embarrassed." Communications become disingenuous. We post on there not because it's what we really feel, but because it's the right thing to do. It's the thing that we do to show our friendship with somebody is to like what they're saying. And if the way that we're communicating has become disingenuous and it's not really reflecting our real feelings, it's not only an odd way of expressing ourselves to everyone watching, but it actually changes the nature of the friendship with the person that you're interacting with on their post. So I'd argue that social communication is potentially deteriorating, at least in some ways, thanks to social media.
All right, so let's move on to question number 3, unless, Matt, you had something that just burning desire to say something as a follow-up to that one.
It probably would have been wrong anyway.
Okay, moving on to question number 3 then. Social media often, and Matt, this one we'll start with you. Social media often provides a voice to those that would not otherwise have a platform for sharing their opinions. Has this created a behavior shift or loss of social graces?
I think it absolutely has. You have a lot of people now that have a forum that they didn't have before. 15 years ago, a group of college kids sitting around in a dorm watching the debate last night, they're just talking to themselves. They may be texting a friend here or there, but it's not widespread. Now, you'll have 7 college kids sitting in a room, and all of them have 600 followers on Twitter. And all of a sudden, their thoughts become that much more prevalent and open to the world. And I think the problem is that you're seeing a dip in social graces because people get to do that in a safe place. They get to tweet at another person from their own living room in a place that they're comfortable. They're not sitting out on the campus green face to face with someone that opposes them when they might be less likely to say something of whatever it may be, an insult, disagreement. And I think what you're seeing as well is that that's somewhat changing the workplace dynamic. If you have a workplace dynamic that's half conservative, half liberal, and you're watching that debate last night and you see one of your coworkers supporting Trump or Clinton and you support the other, all of a sudden your judgment of that person is shifting just a little bit. Because you're saying, I never had a problem with Chris before, but now that he supports X, Y, and Z, I don't support any of that. So the next day you walk into work and you look at Chris a little bit differently and say I think you're sort of a tool. And it's just like that. That's simple. And I think that changes not only your online behavior, but it also changes your in-person behavior. And so that relates back to the last topic, that it just carries over from one screen into real life.
Dr. Mitch, same question.
In the 90s and in the early 2000s, we really saw a movement towards political correctness. What's interesting about social media is that it's created the opportunity for us to anonymously be extremely politically incorrect. That's something very interesting about social media. You can post whatever you want without looking at them in the face and without being identified even. And what's happened is that we've bifurcated the conversation that we're having between extraordinary political correctness in the public eye and now an avenue to be extremely inappropriate in an anonymous way. This is probably why we've seen such a tremendous increase in cyberbullying. Cyberbullying obviously didn't exist before there was social media, but now that there is, the rates are increasing. It's something that's out of the school's jurisdiction. They can't control it. No one can control it. Parents who think that they're monitoring their kids' social media don't know their child has a secret second social media account that the parents can't access. And what's happening is that it's creating a forum where kids can say things that are extraordinarily harmful and inappropriate. And it's also leading to a number of suicides in psychopathology. We're also finding racism to occur over social media in a way that there was just no avenue for that. And that kind of dialogue, if anything, we've seen that recently, really can change the conversation that's happening, really both on and offline. So in a way, I think that giving a voice to people that didn't have a voice can be a really good thing. There are disenfranchised and marginalized groups that are able to get an access to prime time through social media, and that's terrific. But those internet trolls, as they were, are also out there. And unfortunately, that's kind of giving a voice, and a particularly ugly voice, into our national dialogue, not just for political season, but in ways that affect individuals in a pretty scary way.
All right, so for sake of time, I'm embarrassed to say as a moderator, we're going to move on to question 4. Social media provides immediate access to information and can create awareness for current events, brands, social causes, etc. Have we become dependent on this immediate need for information, and are there positives and negatives to this? Dr. Mitch, you first.
I think there are positives and negatives. I've been asked to speak about the negatives, but I'll briefly mention a positive. In the wake of a tragedy right now, there's a way that on social media we can come together as a community and cope and grieve and experience things that we never did before. And that creates a sense of community, not just within our friends and neighborhoods, but globally. And I think after Princess Diana's death, it was the first time that really people talked about a international grieving community that was able to happen because of social media. I will say, though, that if I was speaking strictly against social media, I would say that, in addition, there is a potential problem. And maybe what we're seeing over these last couple weeks is a good symptom of it. It used to be that the news cycle was something that took a couple of days, because we were really relying on the 6 o'clock news in the newspaper. Then for a while, people talked about the 24-hour news cycle, and a lot of that had to do with CNN coming out in 1980. And suddenly stories had to be generated every single day, 24 hours a day, and the story was old after 24 hours. You could argue that social media has reduced the media cycle to just a few hours. Something that's hot on Twitter now, within the afternoon, it's no longer hot anymore. The topic is over. We've all been bombarded with the information. Stories and accusations and quotes and slights or that normally would have dominated, for instance, a presidential campaign or been the discussion of ongoing investigation. It's out of the news in less than a day. And I think in some ways social media has contributed to that kind of rapid news cycle. There's no longer a time to fact check. There's no longer a time to discuss each story through the entire experience of that story. It's a flashy headline, an immediate reaction, and we're on to the next story. And I think this season, if any, has really shown us what that rapid news cycle could look like.
Matt?
Yeah, I think, again, there are definitely pros and cons to this issue, and there's no question that we are now dependent on real-time updates. Now, it's a positive when you look at a sporting event, for example, or someone giving a speech, because these are fact-based things. If the Carolina Panthers are tweeting updates from their game, you know that, okay, a 15-yard pass, that was a 15-yard pass for a first down. If someone is tweeting quotes from a speech, yep, that is what the person said, or at least the very least the gist of it, and that's what that person is saying. What happens is in these national tragedies, these large tragedies, where you have 10, 15, 20 news organizations collapsing on one situation, and the guy from the AP is reporting something different from the guy from the Washington Post, who's reporting something different from the New York Times. And all of a sudden, you might hear that there are 10 people, or 10 fatalities, or you might hear that there's 50. And all of a sudden, you have no idea what to believe, because what's happened is that journalists being first is more important than ever. And they are so worried about being first that they'd rather just get the information out there. They might check once, they might check twice, and if they have that second confirmation, boom, it goes out there, whether it's right or not. And that's when people start freaking out. That's when people become overreactive to what a situation may or may not actually be, simply because they saw it on Twitter. And if it comes from the New York Post, or excuse me, the New York Times, all of a sudden that's got 1,000 retweets. And then the cycle just continues and continues and continues. And so I think, again, for a fact-based event, yeah, the real-time update is great. People love it. And you can follow along if you can't have your eyes on a TV. But in something that is fluid, something that the facts aren't already gathered, it can become a very dangerous situation.
So what you just said, I want to spin maybe kind of a rebuttal here as a question. Do you guys see more organizations, or the need for more organizations to apologize more for doing things like that? Oh, there's 10 people of, fatalities of 10 people. Oh, wait, that was wrong. There's only 5. Do you see the need for then that news source to come back out and say, we were wrong, or do they just keep trucking along? What do you think's right or wrong in that? And I'll let, Dr. Mitch, you can go first, and then I'll let Matt.
I think there's less of a need. Well, I don't know if there's less of a need for it, but there certainly seems to be less of a practice of doing it. It used to be with old-fashioned newspapers, we talked about what was above the fold and below the fold. But at this point, those stories are buried below the screen, the scroll, as it were, in a matter of minutes. And I don't think people need to go back and apologize. It's old news in a matter of literally minutes. And I think that we have a disposable approach to our information now. Information is good as long as it's good for 5 minutes. And if it doesn't stand the test of that length of time, that's okay. There's more information being pushed out immediately. I think your question's a really good one, and I think it's changed the way that we think about responsibility in journalism and the way that we talk about how to stand by what it is that we report, whether it's the media or whether it's just our own opinions. Opinions are as cheap and as quick as they scroll down below your feed. And that's unfortunate. It takes away the intellectualism of our discourse.
Matt?
Yeah, I think there's definitely some truth to that. If again the New York Times posts something on Twitter that's incorrect, but again this is a worldwide tragedy, a worldwide event, your feed is blowing up nonstop. So if I see that there's 10 fatalities, then I see 3 different organizations report that there's only 5, I'm not going to scroll back and say, hey, the New York Times got that one wrong, I want an apology. From an integrity standpoint, from a journalistic standpoint, absolutely, they should apologize. And they probably have a right to, but at the same time, me as a consumer, I'm not going to sit there and criticize the New York Times for getting something wrong, because I've already read 20 tweets since that one was posted that have actually told me what the real story is. And so all of a sudden, that's in the back of my mind, that's below the fold, and I'm already on to, okay, give me more information.
Gentlemen, that are the 4 questions that I have planned for this evening. We will now open it up. If Jacob wants to, there he is, I see him behind me. We will take one question. I would encourage that your question be something that they both can answer instead of just directed towards one, if possible. Any questions? Fantastic. All the way up. Either one. I'm going to let Jacob pick.
I saw you coming to you.
All right, so with social media, like this is very new, so it's maybe like on the top peak of an oscillation. I think a lot of things in life kind of oscillate to an equilibrium. And maybe one of the things that I've read about social media is it sparks a sense of narcissism in growing adolescents. So could you maybe speak on how you think that could be countered and pushed to a productive thing so that narcissism isn't the outcome of adolescence in social media?
Either one of you can go first.
Well, thank goodness for parents, because I think that most parents have grown up without social media, at least not in the way that we see it today. Parents can remind kids that while social media might be fun, while it might be something that gives them an opportunity to communicate rapidly, it's not the outcome that we should be shooting for. My kids are toddlers, and when I go to the grocery store, they want to pick up little magazines that are about like Frozen and, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. But when I pick up those magazines, I can't help but see the teen magazines right next to them. And when I saw a teen magazine with a cover story focused specifically on how to become social media famous, with an instruction guide explaining to adolescents how to hire a publicist and get as many followers as they can, because that was the way to cure their adolescent ails, it made me scared. It made me think that I hope there are parents out there giving a different message. I get that magazines want to sell magazines, no fault to them, but parents are still important and still can be in the role of explaining to adolescents that while there's some fun and there's some way that it gives us a little rush whenever we find we got a lot of activity on our feed or whatever, real human connection, real opportunity to form relationships has payoff in a way that goes far beyond the short-term narcissistic rush you get from some of that kind of more irresponsible use of social media. So please, if you are a parent or know a parent, this is a conversation worth sitting down and having with an adolescent. This is a new world, and none of us lived through it. So it's a good opportunity to understand and appreciate. I know this feels important to you. I know everyone else is doing this. But here's what really matters, and I can tell you from experience.
Yeah, I think that, again, going back to what we were saying earlier, there is a gratification sense. I have 1,000 friends on Facebook. That tweet got 1,000 retweets because NC State Athletics retweeted me. And all of a sudden, it's becoming in someone's mind that this is really, really important that people like me, that I have 1,500 Facebook friends. No one in this room knows 1,500 people. So no one on the planet knows 1,500 people. Just bear with me. But you're certainly not friends with 1,500 people.
That got aggressive. It's fine.
You know, going into my freshman year of college, I got a lot of friend requests from people I had never met simply because I was in my college's incoming class. Why do I need to be friends with you? I might never speak to you in 4 years, so why am I going to be your Facebook friend? Well, but you know what? If I go into my freshman year and I have 800 friends instead of 700 friends, people are going to think I'm popular. And all of a sudden, you develop this social circle before you even get there. So one way a parent can look at it is, okay, you know what? You can have a Twitter account, but you don't get a Facebook account until you join 2 clubs in high school. Once you join 2 clubs in high school, you get that Facebook account, but you don't get an Instagram until you join 2 more clubs. And that way you're developing this human interaction, all of this human interaction that they're forced to have to get something that they want. And then they can build out that social network after laying the groundwork of one-on-one, large group, personal communication.
Well said. I like that idea. The join clubs once you get Facebook once you join clubs, get Instagram. I like that. And it scares me that you had Facebook going into college. I had it as I was leaving college. They just opened it up. Gentlemen, thank you so much. We really appreciate all the answers and the friendly debate.